And good morning, LinkedIn.
Good morning,
It's Friday. For those of you in the UK, it is a bank holiday weekend. We have the Friday feeling times 3. Woohoo. So welcome. So I'm Emma Howard here with my wonderful co-host, as ever, Cheryl Miller.
Good morning.
There she is. Good morning. The sun is shining where we are today. And we are live with you for a quick discussion on something that actually we were just saying before we began. The way we phrased it sounds really controversial, which is deliberate, which is, does female biology justify the gender pay gap? And here's the question, guys.
And it could either be a very short conversation,
It could be very long.
And then we could just call it a day, or it could be no.
Well, actually, let's begin here, because like you guys who've spoken to me before will know that I once ended a relationship because someone questioned whether there was a gender pay gap, right? So let's just start here. We're not arguing that there is. Right. So the very fact that there is a gender pay gap means that there are some ways that people have to justify it psychologically in their minds. Right. And we wanted to talk around whether actually female biology is one of those, because with period leave coming in, with increased menopause awareness, with maternity kind of, increasing and now moving over to paternity, is female biology the thing that people actually are too afraid to say justifies the gender pay gap for large I say large and small organisations?
Yeah, it is a tricky one, isn't it? So I thought that it'd be useful to just start off with some of the facts, because we always like to get factual.
You love the facts, right? I just love to be like, this is what I think.
Do you know what? I worked on a project once where I was known for kind of saying, let's get factual. What are the facts? Let's get factual, right? So
that's going to be the title of Cheryl's album, everybody. Let's get factual.
Yeah, in tribute to the late Olivia Newton-John. So obviously, in Spain, a couple of months ago, they announced the plans to approve, as Emma was saying, menstrual leave, I think is the official term, at least that's how it's translated. But they weren't the first one. So actually, 1922, the Soviet Union introduced period leave, would you believe? And then
I didn't see that coming. Thank you, Cheryl.
Yeah, every day's a school day. So 1947 as well, Japan, 1948 Indonesia, and then into the 2000s, then you've got South Korea, Taiwan, and most recently Zambia, where interestingly, so Zambia was in 2017, and colloquially, it's actually called Mother's Day. So even though it's leave to do it, which is slightly ironic.
Yeah, do they know how menstruation works, do you think?
So the thing is, it's not new, which I thought was quite interesting, actually. And in some of those countries, it has been repealed for the very reason that some women feel that it isn't kind of conducive to, kind of like equality and equal rights. So I thought that's quite interesting.
Yeah. And how do we know how long those? Sorry, Alex is here. Do we know how long those leaves are? Are they just one day, or are they as long as you need?
Yeah, typically, I mean, the Spain one, they've been talking about sort of 3 days per month. So typically, I think around the sort of like anything from sort of 1 to 4 days. And I think with the Spanish one in particular, they have said it's, if there are sort of like, medical complications or issues, or if it's quite severe, such that obviously you're sort of incapacitated and can't work. But in some of the other countries, it was kind of just like, you can get that day and you don't have to provide, for example, a doctor's note or whatever, you can just have the time off. So yeah, some interesting aspects to talk about, I think.
And how interesting that it isn't, this is me showing my inherent bias, right? How interesting that it isn't countries I would traditionally think of as leading the way in kind of equality and diversity recognition. So it's funny, isn't it? The smugness that we so often get in Western, and let's be clear, particularly white countries, around kind of, even the phrase, we've talked about it before, the phrase first world, develop, third world as it used to be called, just illustrates this gap between our perception of ourselves in kind of the West versus the rest of the world.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, really interesting. But it definitely links to the question of, I think there's the thing around the perception of what it does. When you have that leave in place in the workplace as an option, whether or not you think it's a good or a bad thing, what does it do? And that's probably some of the conversation we'll get into. But I thought it was worth, before we getting into the debate, how about just talking about menopause awareness and where that's gone? Because I know some of the organisations you've worked in have done a fair bit on this.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm laughing because I won't share it on the live.
Don't shame any organisation.
I'm not going to shame any other organisation, but I did go to a presentation at one point where an organisation did give us some lubricant, which I really could have done without. At the time, I think I was about 37, so I was like, please, I don't want to discuss this, which in itself is interesting, right? So, yeah, menopause, I think, is being recognised now as and I'm going to say potential, because it's not the same for everybody, right? And we talk about how do we create policies and procedures and processes that cater to everybody but empower the individual, right? So yeah, you can now get kind of time off depending on the organization you work for. We're often having scenarios where people are going on menopause awareness training. I have to be blunt, I get a little bit nervous around that, because I think it does give another way for some employees to say, don't listen to her, it's just her hormones. Yeah. Particularly when women show emotion. So I have a kind of an interesting relationship with this, but it's the same as maternity leave. So we still have very few organizations that do equal paternity or maternity leave, right? And we won't even get into the argument that I have made repeatedly, that if you do not choose to have a child, you still have a family that you may need to take that leave for. So how do you open it up into a whole world? But yeah, it seems like female kind of biological challenges are now being put into policies, particularly in HR, in a way that we haven't seen before, which I think is fascinating, as you pointed out, that it runs alongside this debate around why does the gender pay gap exist?
Yeah.
And in my most cynical days, I sometimes wonder, is it a coincidence that those two things lie together? Because a world where you get 3 days off a month for a period and you get 9 months maternity, but when you come back to work, you're paid a quarter less than your male peer. Harder to moan about that, surely, when you feel you're being given all these perks, because they're still presented as perks.
Yes.
And that is, I suppose, my concern around this. And maybe our question shouldn't even have been, does female biology justify the gender pay gap? It's how many businesses, organizations, and society in general is using female biology to justify the gender pay gap.
Yeah, 100%. And just to share with anybody that's listening, just in terms of background, so for context, so I have had one child. Well, I still have one child. A bit older than the child, but so I and in fact, and when I was pregnant, I worked at EY, so quite generous maternity pay back then. Back in the 90s was quite generous. So I have benefited certainly from that. I didn't choose the organisation just because of their maternity pay, and the reason I say that is because I have worked at an organisation. I won't say where it was, but I got a random phone call out of the blue from somebody a guy that I hadn't worked with for years, asking me what the maternity policy was like, because his wife was thinking of moving there, and I thought, you can imagine the face that I did in the eye rolling. But anyway. So I have, I have had a child, have been on maternity leave, have come back into the workplace full time, etc. And I'm now in the stage of life where I guess I am going into that kind of like I'm in that transitional perimenopause / menopause phase of life. And I must stress as well, obviously, neither myself nor Emma, at least the last time I checked, we're not medical doctors, right? So
I'm not diagnosing your stage of.
And neither are we invalidating anyone's personal experience or personal journey or medical challenges or anything like that. But I certainly, when it comes to maternity leave, this is something I've been sort of thinking about or saying for a long time, that I do think when extended maternity leave came in for women, and when there was nothing commensurate for men, and still we know now that shared parental leave, the take-up is incredibly low. I do think that does disadvantage women 100%. And actually, an organisation that came to me last year wanting some help with, gender balance and stuff like that, I sort of said, well, what have you done so far to sort of tackle, gender balance in terms of leadership, etc. And they said, we've made the maternity policy more generous. I said, oh, so you're paying women more to stay away from work. I said, what have you done with the paternity policy? And I said, maybe it's worth looking at balancing that up, actually, because what message do you send? So it's complex, isn't it?
It is also, in the same way that Cheryl's just said, we're not medical doctors, which is a disappointment to me. I had only been friends with you for all this time because I thought that you were able to. There is also something to me around it. Let's just call out here. There is a difference between what is offered to women in what I would call professional workplaces versus certainly the women that I knew or I grew up with who would have actually benefited from better maternity policies, right? Which are kind of manual workers, people who we know are kind of perhaps doing contracts or doing, 0 hours contracts. That's almost a different thing, right?
Yeah.
And anything that we can do to support those women is absolutely there, right?
Yeah.
I think where you and I are both talking about at the moment is kind of that professional, forgive me because I don't know another way to say it, that kind of professional, FTSE environment, consultancy, whatever it is, who, you're exactly right. I think actually unintentionally unbalance great maternity policies with progression for women who have children.
Yeah.
Or my personal favourite, and I'm just going to put this out there, guys, who covers the work of people who are on maternity leave? And I say people who are on maternity leave because we know that, who covers it? I'm going to guarantee you 9 times out of 10, it's the young women in the team who do it for no extra money. I've been that person. So it becomes, I think, in many cases, in the same way that I think the gender pay gap lining up with increased benefits is a bit of a red herring. We also have to think beyond. I don't understand why we've got no women on the board, but we give them such great maternity leave. Oh, that's great, because every woman wants to have a child, and also every woman just thinks about the time that she's off. What do you do within the environment to ensure that actually people can still deliver? And then I'm going to ask the really obvious question here, right? And I'm really sorry if anyone's watching this, but I'm going to play devil's advocate. How would you feel if you're working, whatever gender you are, if you're working really, really hard on a project and it's dependent on peers of yours to deliver as well, and those peers, male or female or, non-binary, are consistently out of the office because they have personal either time accrued or because they have personal challenges in their work that actually now begins to impact on yours? Does that then feel fair if that person is paid the same as you? Because my question is always, we are, I think, intrinsically built in, and I find this myself, I have to call it, this is a bias for me, right? You notice how in the workplace, we believe you have to really work for your money, really put the effort in, right? And we're British, so we get pissed off if people aren't really, you should look like you're dying. It's the other flip side of presenteeism. I want to see you run into the office looking panicked every morning because I'm working hard, so everyone else has to. Isn't that a cultural shift that actually is at the heart of this as well?
Yeah, it is. It is. There is that sense of almost you have to be seen to be working incredibly hard and be seen to, be giving every ounce of your energy and of your life into your work. And when you're not, so when it seems like you're slacking, how does that go down?
Or even on occasions where you are slacking, because we've all had, I can't imagine that there were not certain points within your time raising your daughter, your wonderful daughter, who is still here, even though I had one child, where you weren't. Cheryl always runs at 150% where everybody else is dragging themselves in on 70. But I imagine even for you at certain points, that output dropped to 95.
Oh yeah, definitely, because you can't do it. A bit like multitasking, which is a false economy. You think you're spinning all these plates, but actually what you're happening is you spin a plate, one stops, and then you run to the next one.
That's you. What you just described. That's you.
Yeah. So it is definitely it's definitely a false economy. It doesn't, it's very difficult to actually spin everything and be 100% in all of those different aspects of your life. And there is some sort of like almost reality check, I think, particularly for women who are mothers, but also linking to the maternity leave, actually. And this is one of the bits of advice. Do you know what? I know Sheryl Sandberg gets a really hard time about leaning, right, and stuff like that. And I'm not going to go into all of the whys and wherefores, but the one bit of advice that I think she gives in her book that I think is very underrated for particularly for women who want to become mothers, right? Or even if we think of same-sex relationships, for the woman or the female or the man that wants to take on that main caring role, if you also want to progress in your career, you have to be really careful, as Cheryl says, to make your partner a real partner at home, if that makes sense. Because if you want to be that person that is available for board meetings or whatever it be, or things that are sometimes at the drop of a hat, or late nights or something, you have to ensure that you have a partner that's also doing their fair share of the childcare, the housework, the blah blah blah. Do you know what I mean? Whereas what I feel extended maternity leave does, and what we unwittingly do sometimes, I think, as the women that have the children or the females that have the children, is that we kind of hold on to that for a long time, and we hold on to that identity. And let's not talk about Mumsnet today again, but some women cling on to that identity so much, but then they also still want the benefits of, oh, I want to be the high flyer in the office, and where that then comes unstuck is when the school is always calling you as the mum, regardless of whether you're 50 or 60 miles away, on like a a highfalutin project. You're the one that are called because you've kind of set yourself up as the main carer. So I think sometimes we unwittingly put ourselves in the position where we don't allow our partners, whatever gender they are, to step up and play that role, because we sort of take it all on just because we're the one that have had the child, basically.
I completely agree with you. And I also think I was just thinking about some female CEOs that I'm aware of, and one in particular who would often use the phrase, I'm a mom first, and go off to spend time with the children when perhaps there was a business decision that needed to be made. And this I'm a mom first thing was really interesting, because I truly believe, yes, you are a mom, but you also have 3 nannies, right? And also when you are at the top of a business and you are taking the pay, because that's all we talk about, right? If you think about when you've had increases in your pay, it's around the responsibility that's expected, right?
Yeah.
And the not the effort that's given, but the commitment that's there, right? I'm a mom. Well, you are, but you're also a CEO of a business that actually pays X amount of people's salaries. So within X amount of hours, or within these circumstances, I actually need you, as a man would do, to put aside the fact that you are there. I'm not talking life-threatening. I'm talking like someone's got flu, right? And I need you to be fully present. And I think sometimes, that, and this is no disrespect, this is not singling out an individual, but I have heard that kind of, I'm a mum first weaponized in a way that men don't do. Well, they don't have to, do they? Right? But that then calls into question. Then people feel uncomfortable. I can't challenge them because actually they're a mum. Well, yeah, but you have a job to do as well. So how do we balance that? Because I think people are getting really uncomfortable with that question.
But do you know what you said there? I think you said something there. You said something like, in a way that men don't have to. And I almost think that when you are in the workplace, when you are a parent who is female versus a parent who is male, or a parent who is a woman or a man, and obviously you've got non-binary as well. But when you're a parent who is a woman, the expectations on you are different. I believe the expectations will be on you to, put the kids first, and more so than if you're a man. And I think if anything, you would potentially be punished if you didn't, because you'd be seen as hard-faced, whatever.
That hasn't been my experience of working with some very senior women. It has been a really kind of, and again, it has been something that is almost the justification for absence, right? In the way that You know, I truly believe if you reach a certain role within any organization, you are always on. You have to be, right? Because that's what you paid for, right?
Yeah.
And we're talking here when your salary gets past $500,000, right? I'm not
Yeah.
talking about anybody who's on 20 grand, you know, and this is where we need to get, what are they buying from you, right? So, you know, it then becomes easier because you do have the resource to pay other people to support and to pay other people to help with children. It comes back to this question you said around what's it like at home. But I do wonder whether we're going to move away from this concept of, because it's very binary to say kind of, you know, children, not children, menopause, not menopause, right? Ill, not ill, you know. Do we move into a world in the next couple of years, and I hope we could, where we say life circumstances?
Exactly. And that's you know, I would hope that you know, almost like regardless of the expectations on, you know, men, women, non-binary, and that's people that identify with either. Because what I was thinking about actually, you know, similar to what you said in terms of life circumstances, there are life circumstances and things that affect us and affect our physical health, mental health. And then there are also, you know, we know that there are different hormonal challenges, you know, depending on the biological sex you've been assigned or whatever. But you know, there are things around hormonal health that are different for different reasons. But you know, men also have challenges with hormones and hormonal health. And this is the thing that I think why the Spanish thing kind of got to me so much. I was like, what? So men don't have any reason to be ill either? Like in a way that, you know, when we look at, you know, things like mental health and depression and suicide rates and all of that, and I'm thinking, what, of all of the things that are happening, of all of the ways that people need support in the workplace at the moment, like that's all you came up with, like period leave? Like, is that it? Like,
do you know what? And this is why actually mental health days for me are a really interesting one. Yeah. Of, you know, I mean, do you really want to call it that? Not really, but you know, I'm having a mental health day. Stop calling me, right? But like, you know, that.
Yeah.
But then we also have to think about. I truly believe we have to start thinking as well around responsibility, right? And when I work with people, the same as when they're in my family or they're friends of mine, I have a responsibility for how I show up, right? So we have to be aware of all of the, you know, what hormones am I on? I'm not. But you're like, where's my mind at? And, you know, I've said to you before, I do a check-in in the morning to go, right, okay, depending on where I'm at, how do I need to show up today? Which I know you've done before as well, yeah? So we need to think, what if I got a really big project due today and there was a meeting that I was chairing with 8 people on it and I wanted to have a period day? Is that okay, right? And while I never, and I'm asking this question, so, you know, any of you who are kind of watching this live, this is my question, because we've all struggled through work in scenarios where we probably would have preferred not to.
Yeah.
At what point does giving yourself that time and that kind of, you know, space to get better in whatever way impact on the fact that it's actually going to have an effect on a lot of other people, you know? And I suppose I've said to you before, I have a bit of a utilitarian approach, right? Great is good for the greatest number. So often when I've been particularly unwell, I've kind of almost done a risk assessment in my head of, okay, so this puts out 3 people versus me, versus this actually puts out 20 people versus me. How do you balance that?
Exactly. And obviously, and what we're not saying is that, you know, because we know that part of the reason that this has been brought in is because there are some debilitating conditions connected
God,
to it. You know, we understand that, you know, there's endometriosis and polycystic ovarian, you know, PCOS and all of that, you know, we completely recognize that. But I still think that, you know, just as you've said there, in terms of if someone is incredibly ill, right, such that they, you know, so maybe physically can't even get out of bed and having terrible migraines, you know, all of those, you know, depressive symptoms or whatever, then there is, as you've just sort of said there, Emma, there's that kind of like assessment of, oh my gosh, how ill am I? You know, can I make it in or can I not? In the same way that you would with almost like any medical condition, whether or not you were male, female, man, woman, non-binary. Do you know what I mean? I'm struggling with, why has this been singled out? I don't understand it.
And let me give you a perfect example here, right? This is where I think this whole kind of female biology becomes a red herring, right? Obviously, I've never mentioned it before, but my mom is dead. But when she was terminally ill, and those of you who listen to the podcast will know why that is. It's not funny, but it is of itself not unamusing. When she was dying, she had to go to a number of appointments because obviously dying is an interesting business, which actually, it would be very interesting. Dying to Live Charter is something I'd really like to talk about around how do people with terminal illnesses continue to work, because I prefer they got to do it because they wanted to, not because they had to. This is the difference, right? We don't want to work in a society where people are working through illnesses, dropping babies on the floor and dying at their desk. But, we know that work can give us purpose. But I remember saying to a colleague of mine, I need to step out because I need to take her to an appointment, right? And I got stony faced, I really did get, why are you doing that? And I thought, I'm going to run a bit of an experiment here. The next person I told, I said it was my child. I didn't say my child was terminally ill. I said I had a medical appointment for my child.
Yeah,
absolutely
fine. Yeah, exactly, because that is more expected. Yeah, absolutely.
So how do we, and then almost I had to justify, she really is dying. Do you know what I mean? So how do we, which is the flip side of, are people faking it? And I think, do we just come back to, and I think we're almost missing the gender pay gap, but even in terms of these type of policies, do we come back to how do we engender a scenario of trust with our work, with our kind of work colleagues and our, bosses and stuff, so that actually we know when Cheryl says she needs this day, she really needs this day. Have whatever you want.
Yeah.
I trust you implicitly that stuff gets done. So focus on you. That would be a different world, wouldn't it?
Wouldn't it be? And that obviously kind of connects back to how well people are kind of managed, how clearly, objectives are and things like that. Do you know what I mean? It all goes back down to what's the management like and what's the sort of culture like? Is it a sort of trust environment, where people can be, where people can be trusted to kind of make those decisions for themselves and come and have a sensible conversation with their team or their manager or other people that they're working with that are relying on them and kind of work through things.
So can I kind of ask you to, and I was actually thinking I'm very lucky because I do work in that type of environment at the moment. I was just actually reflecting, and I want to say this really clearly. There are some businesses and individuals out there doing this brilliantly. It doesn't require policies and procedures. It requires trust and conversation. So kind of, as we almost kind of, I think we'll go slightly over, but I just want to come back to, hi, Maxine. Being transparent about conditions is really important, especially when you're in roles that are dependent on your output. Yes, organisations have to take female conditions on board and allow a person not to feel guilty because they need time out. Do you know what, Maxine, as ever, talking sense, right? I would actually say organisations have to take human conditions on board, right? Because the question I was just about to ask you, Cheryl, you do work across D&I all the time, yeah? How are things like period leave or kind of menopause awareness or increased maternity leave, how are they being perceived as a marker of equality, yeah? Or are they just something where people then like, well, nice for you to have, why do you still get paid the same as me? Which is where we get into the gender pay gap piece.
I think that a lot of organisations are still like that organisation I mentioned before. I think that people see things like this as being like female-friendly policies, but I do just think that it unwittingly sets these like sort of different standards and different expectations. So I do think I think we just have to kind of go carefully. I mean, I think Maxine's right in terms of, as you said, Emma, I think it should be that organisations take everybody's like sort of, personal circumstances or allows everybody the space to have time if they need that time in a way where it's like, we trust you, you're going to deliver your output, blah, 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 etc., as Maxine was saying. But I think at the moment we're in a space of, probably because and I hate this phrase, but we're all dancing the wokey cokey at the moment, right? And probably because organisations are in a space where they almost feel that they have to do these things that are like, in fashion or whatever. So they will take on board these things because they think it's the right thing to do, but not necessarily thinking through the consequences. So how so our male colleagues, how do they feel when all of a sudden, people are going to start disappearing every month? And I'm not saying that they can't, because obviously if there is a medical issue, then obviously that's absolutely fine. But I think organisations just need to think through the ramifications of it.
Let's also draw a distinction, and I say this all the time, right? I have known friends and colleagues with either endometriosis, PCOS, all these things, which actually are really difficult conditions, right? And they're health conditions. Yeah. Versus for those individuals who've never had a period, right? It's really it doesn't necessarily need to be that kind of. It isn't disruptive if you are lucky, right? But I think we need to draw the distinction between needing that support and that extra time, because actually this is as Maxine says, it really, you need that time, versus my alarm goes off, it's my period, great, I'm taking 2 days off. Actually, I'm perfectly fine. So, and it comes back to those of you who listen to the podcast will know that we have a lot of discussion around for mental health, because I really do believe that we have started, although the discussions around mental health is great, we've sanitized it. So we don't talk about people who actually, we love mental health until actually someone is mentally unwell, right? So
we love we love the anxiety and depression, hashtag X, Y, and Z. We love that kind of that popular safe bit, but talk about some of the more serious stuff like psychosis and serious personality disorders. They're still quite stigmatized, is the reality of it.
Completely. And this is why I think we need to draw a distinction between, you can have period leave every time you want it versus it's available for the individual according to their needs, right? And I come back to, my dear departed mother who worked in equal opportunities for years before it became popular, and used to have to do things like train council builders on how not to scream racial slurs at people, which is always fun, right? But she would say, doing a huge amount of work across kind of communities, she would say equality is not treating everyone the same. It is treating everyone according to their needs. So how do we get to a point where people can be really open about what their needs are? For some people want to come back to work after having a baby after 4 weeks. I've seen it before, right? What is it that you need and you want as an individual and as an employee? And can you communicate that to your employer and your manager? And then there's policies around to support that and keep you safe. Absolutely. That would be like a dream, wouldn't it?
And recognizing also that men, males and men and trans men and trans women all have needs around, whether it be, hormonal health, medical health, mental health. And that's my plea. My plea is, if you're going to do something like this, fine, but why not expand it so that everybody is kind of covered? Everybody's given that same grace. Do you know what I mean? We're talking about giving people grace, and I just think that should be expanded, not just to people that have a uterus.
Do you know what? Grace is such a wonderful word, and the other word that I would use to balance that, right, is grace with boundaries.
Yeah.
Because actually, where this stuff flips over, and let's be brutally honest, even when I'm thinking about it here, the reason that even those of us who truly believe in, I'm a feminist, I truly believe in, kind of getting that level of equality in the workplace. Hi, Jelena. But the reason that we all can feel nervous about this is because we all know people who've taken the piss, or who we have perceived to have taken the piss, when we are working, because we've still got this thing in of, hustle. So how amazing would it be to have, as Jelena's actually saying here, that grace and those boundaries, where you have trust on both sides, and your boss can say to you, I'm really happy for you to have whatever time you need, right? And I fully support you being paid, male, female, non-binary. But this hasn't been delivered. So let's separate these two things out. So, and I think Jelena's actually saying this really well.
Yeah.
in that trust, care, and excellence, you know?
Yeah, trust, care, and excellence, and then treating people in accordance with their needs, and then you kind of drive the individual and overall performance. Yeah, and then the final comment from Maxine: would love to hear us discuss mental health and invisible illnesses.
We love both of those. So maybe we'll do. Do you know what, guys? There might be something really interesting for us to do a live on here. In that, if I was even discussing this yesterday with some people I work for, you know, this thing we have at the moment of show up as your true self at work. That's all very well if you're skipping in and you're neurotypical and your life is great, right?
Yeah.
Woo! How do you show up if actually there are elements to you as an individual and your lived experience that your colleagues in your workplace can't comprehend?
Yeah. Well, yeah, we could get into that now, but yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Maxine. You've just done us next week's title. Wonderful as ever. And Shalana, I love that. I love that phrase. Thank you so much.
Yelena, thank you so much.
Brilliant.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, we're going to end it there. Wishing that you all have an amazing Friday and a great bank holiday weekend, especially if you're in the UK.
Absolutely. And you know what? Let's take Cheryl's kind of quote for this. Yeah. Grace to each other. And then let's add my quote in with boundaries, right? So grace with boundaries in every interaction today, guys. If you don't want to do it, please borrow my phrase. No, thank you. I'd really rather not. Okay. And that's the way that you can go through the weekend.
Amazing. Have a great day.
Have a good one. Bye.